We are working our way through the book of Exodus, and we're in Exodus chapter 5 today as we continue our series on the call. Last week when we were together, Preacher Bill took us to the reality that the call was rejected, so hardships followed. Moses and Aaron go before Pharaoh and in essence say, Pharaoh, Pharaoh, let my people go. And he said, no. And so today we find where another group is going to go before Pharaoh, but they're going to miss the assignment. They're going to go and they're not going to reiterate what Moses and Aaron have said to Pharaoh. Instead, they're going to ask for Pharaoh to relent just a little bit. Last week, Preacher Bill talked about that in that season of stubble that we find ourselves where that the time that they were in captivity, that they were slaves for almost 400 years, their hard labor of making bricks, that during that time, the Egyptians actually provided the straw for them to make the bricks. But because of Moses and Aaron going before him, in his anger, he says, no more straw for you. You go out and find your own stubble. Make your bricks from what you can find. And what's going to take place, even though we're not going to audibly hear Moses utter these words, but what we're going to see take place as we end chapter 5 and get into chapter 6 is there's going to be the call for God to show himself mighty. There's going to be the call for God to do that which only he can do. Moses and Aaron and the foremen of the people are going to find themselves at the point that there's nothing else they can do. There's nothing else they can say. And the only way the situation is going to be turned around is that God is going to have to show himself mighty. Now, if you're here today and you're looking on a smart device or a tablet, we're going to be in the amplified version of the text. And if you've been visiting with us for quite a while, you know that sometimes one of the different pastors that will be teaching may be a New King James or the English Standard Version, but the majority of the time that you come, I'm going to be your teaching pastor, the senior pastor of your church that's going to be bringing your word, and I'm going to be in the amplified text. And so as we look at the text today, we're going to see where the people are going to once again look at the situation. They can't see the hand of God moving, and they're going to have to trust his heart. And it's going to be no different for Moses. Moses, as we get to the end of chapter 5, in other words, he's going to lay an indictment down to God, and he's actually going to ask the question that in no uncertain terms he's going to be saying, God, what are you doing? Why are you not moving? And we're going to be talking about the why questions in life that ultimately come. That little three-letter word, why, is so many times the most powerful question that will ever be asked about a circumstance. But they're going to be talking about the reality of a little four-letter word, what? And how if we're not careful, we'll go from the why is God doing what he's doing to actually question God, what are you doing? Because we can't see your hand moving. So beginning in Exodus chapter 5 and verse number 15, we pick up with a story. It says, then the Hebrew foreman came to Pharaoh and cried, why do you deal like this with your servants? In other words, we don't know the passage of time between last week's text and the text we pick up in today. But we know what happened in that scenario is that Pharaoh says, no more straw will be given to you. You're going to have to go out and find your own stubble. And so as the foreman over the Hebrews, now these are Hebrew foremen that are coming before Pharaoh. These are not Egyptian foremen. As they're coming before Pharaoh, they ask, why are you treating your people so harshly? In other words, for 400 years, we've served you faithfully. For 400 years, whatever the task was, we did it. And even though the taskmasters were hard and we cried out to God, why are you dealing with your people so harshly, dealing with your servants this way? No straw is given to your servants. Yet they say to us, make bricks. And look, your servants are being beaten, but it is the fault of your own people. In other words, what these foremen do is they come before Pharaoh is they say, the situation we're in is beyond our control. You gave the edict that we would get no more straw. But because we have no more straw, now the time that we used to spend making bricks, now we have to go out and find stubble to make the bricks. And because the quota has not changed, as Preacher Bill talked about last week, that the world's quota on you does not change, even though God's calling in your life may change. He says, we can't meet the quota, and because we can't meet the quota, now you're beating us. It's amazing, archaeologists have actually found in recent years that some of the structures there in Egypt, that when they look at the base of these structures, as they break down some of the ingredients, they actually find that those molds were actually made with clay and they were made with straw. And then as they go up higher on the foundation, as they go up higher onto the walls, they actually found where the brick structure actually changes. It's no longer straw that is blended in with the mud to make the bricks, but there's stubble, there's sticks, there's grass. And so when we look at this account, this is not just a biblical account of what happened in the Bible. This is actually a historical account that archaeology actually backs up. that the archaeologists can't understand. Why is it that they would shift? Well, the reason why they shifted was because Pharaoh said, no more straw for you. You're going to go out and find your own stubble. You're going to go into a season of stubble. And in the midst of your season of stubble, the quota doesn't change. The bills keep on coming. Preacher Bill last week talked about when God moved him into a season of stubble. That here he had gone from working with the phone company to owning his own lumber yard, and how the partnership had kind of worked his way out of it. And he found himself unemployed for the first time, but the bills kept on coming. I love the analogy he gave about had a new house, had 2 new daughters, same old wife. I don't know how that went over with Judy when he said that, same old wife. But the altar will be open, Bill. We can get you down here. But it's that reality that the bill collectors don't care. I mean, here's the reality for some of you. If you decide to, by faith, follow God's leading in your life, it may lead you into a season of stubble. It may lead you into a season of where you don't have as much straw as you used to have. But hear me, the God of the straw is still the God of the stubble. And just because you're struggling doesn't mean that he's not still God. When God called me out of the sales rep world of heating and air, I was very successful, made lots of money. I mean, it was a very, very fluid time in our lives. And I talked about how back then we had stupid money. I don't know how many of you newlyweds have stupid money. In other words, you were stupid because you didn't save some of that money. I mean, that was one of those things with me and Haley. I mean, if we wanted it, we went and got it. And it was stupid because it got her used to that mindset that 29 years later, she still has that mindset to some degree. I hope she don't listen to this. But yeah, I won't say it in the third service. But it's one of those things that, we had more money we knew what to do with. Well, then God calls me out of that into full-time ministry. And then when I got called into full-time ministry, I had to cash out my 401k. Now, the company I worked for was very generous. I mean, they had matching. If you gave an X percentage, that they would match X percentage. And so my 401k had built up, and it was really good until the government took their slice out of it. And then it wasn't so good. And then when I went to the church, it was, we're not offering insurance. You've got to get your own insurance. And so I don't know how many of you have ever heard of COBRA insurance. Cash or blood required, amigo. I mean, you're going to get that money. Some of y'all get that. I mean, that's what COBRA stood for me, was cash or blood required, amigo. And so we have all of these bills, and here I am. I've got less income. And I've looked at it from 1998. If you looked at my W-2 to today's buying power, the pay cut that we took was about $50,000 to $60,000, which is over $100,000 today in buying power. And I was like, what am I going to do? I mean, I'm in this season of stubble. And so Thursday was my day off, and there was a man at the church that owned a landscaping business. And he said, look, on Thursdays, if you want to come to work for me, he said, I'll work you. I'll pay you $100 cash. Well, back then, $100 cash in today's buying power was $200. And so I don't know how many of you have ever been to Reeville Road and John B. White Boulevard out there with Dave Edwards, and you've looked at the back of the lot, and there's this huge bank that has grass. You've ever wondered, I wonder how that gets cut. This guy with a weed eater for months, every Thursday, cutting the grass. It's amazing. You think about these dance things. I mean, they have the weed eater that's like that, the sprinkler. They don't have one for cutting the grass. But it was a weed eater. That's all I did. And it was one of the ways to make ends meet. It was a season of stubble. Well, then God blessed me with a friend named Brad Kelly. He was a youth pastor at another church, and a guy at his church had a large piece of property in a farm, and he wanted to hire us to cut his grass. Had 2 big Kubota motors, lawnmowers, had these huge decks on the front of them, and it literally would take us 5 hours to cut all the grass. I mean, it was a huge piece of property, but he would pay us $100 cash. And so during the summertime, when it was time for one of us, we could never go on vacation the same week. We had to plan it, because when one of us was on vacation, the other one would cut all day from like 8 to 7. One mower cutting all of this grass, and we would get $200, which was great, because in today's buying power, that was $400. You can do a lot on vacation with that kind of money. And so is there in those seasons that I would find myself with that weed eater, I would find myself driving that Kubota tractor, and I would be in that, God, what are you doing? Why am I having to do this to make ends meet? I mean, I went from this stage in my life, I had more money than I knew what to do with, and now I'm doing everything I can just to make ends meet. And it was in those moments that I would cry out, God, show yourself mighty. God, do a work, do something. Well, this is what the foremen find themselves in. They're in a season of stubble, and they're in a season of trouble because they can't meet the quota. And look at what they say to Pharaoh. He says, and your servants are being beaten. But Pharaoh said, you are lazy, very lazy, and idle. That is why you say, let us go to the sacrifice to the Lord. The complaint that the Hebrew foreman bring before Pharaoh is a legitimate complaint. The quota has not changed, but the process to meet the quota has. For years, you guys always provided the straw, and we would have guys that would go get the straw, guys that would go get the mud, guys that would make the frames, guys that would put it in the oven, guys that would form it and bring it out, and we could meet the quota, no problem. But now some of those guys are having to go out and find stubble. Some of those guys are having to go out and find grass. They're having to go out and find sticks. And because they're having to spend all the time doing that, they don't have time to make the bricks, and so we're not meeting the quota. And now we're being beaten because of it. And basically what they're saying is, and you've done this to us. Those are the facts. I mean, that scripture is undeniable. But Pharaoh doesn't see it that way. Compassion is not a part of Pharaoh's vocabulary. What does he say? You're lazy. You're very lazy. You're idle. That's why you're not meeting the quota. He says, and that's actually why you want to go out 3 days' journey to the mountain to worship your God. It's really because you're just lazy. You know, we look at this and we would think, man, that Pharaoh is so calloused. But let me say to you that the world today is no different than Pharaoh was in their day. You, by faith, decided you're going to follow God's will for your life. You, by faith, are going to step out into what God's calling you to do. And it may very well lead you into a season of stubble, but don't forget, the quota of bricks is still there. The mortgage company still wants to get their mortgage payment. And they don't care if you're in a season of straw or a season of stubble. If you don't pay your mortgage payment, you're in trouble. You call them up and you say, look, I want to refinance. I want to get a cheaper interest because now I've taken an interest in God's will for my life. They're going to say, well, it's interesting you should say that because you're already behind 2 months payment. And if you don't make another payment, you might want to get interested in Anchor of Hope Ministry with Tammy Edwards in downtown Spartanburg on Friday nights because you're going to be homeless and you're going to need somewhere to go eat. That's just how the world is. The world and Pharaoh are so cold and callous to the situation the people of God find themselves in. And don't expect the world's hand to be any different. It'll be very cold and very calloused to the reality that you decided to follow after God. You decided to be obedient to his will for your life. You knew his heart. And now in the midst of following his heart, you can't see his hand. And it leads you into a season of stubble. He says to them, get out now and get to work. For no straw will be given to you, yet you are to deliver the same quota of bricks. Pharaoh says to them, don't look to me for a handout. Don't look to me for a hand up. Get out, get back to work, and meet your quota. The facts haven't changed. This is what's required of you. The oppressor hasn't changed. I'm still requiring this of you. You're lazy. You're very lazy, and you're idle. Now quit being lazy and idle. Get out of here and get back to work. And the amazing thing is that if you look at this, again, these foremen completely missed the assignment. They didn't go in and say, hey, we're here to just back up what Moses and Aaron said, that you need to let us go. They go in and say, is there any way you can make life easier for us? Is there any way that we could have some straw back to where we don't have to go out and find stubble anymore? And he says, you must not reduce in the least your daily quota of bricks. That cold, calloused hand of Pharaoh. That I don't care that your situation has changed. I don't care that you're in a season of stubble. I don't care that you're no longer in a season of straw. You get out there and you meet your quota and don't reduce it. So verse number 20, when they left Pharaoh's presence, the foreman met Moses and Aaron who were waiting for them. Now we don't have a lot of information about how this interaction takes place, but it's one of those things, it's probably one of two scenarios. Now, these foremen come to Moses and Aaron before they go to Pharaoh and they say, look, we're going to go into Pharaoh. You guys really messed things up. We're going to go in there and we're going to try to smooth things over. We're going to go over there and we're going to do a little political background, see if we can get things a little bit lighter on the people, and then we'll let you know how things go. And so it could be that Moses and Aaron are waiting outside the court, just waiting on the foreman to come out and just see how things went. Also, scenario is Moses and Aaron are hanging out with the Hebrews, the slaves, and they're all waiting to see. And you can almost envision as they're walking toward Moses and Aaron, there is this consternation on their face. I mean, there's this scowl on their face. And Moses and Aaron don't know what they're going to say, but they got a good idea of how they're going to say it. They can tell by the way they're looking at them that things did not go well with Pharaoh. It's amazing that when you think about what's going on in their lives, here they are, they're trying to be obedient to what God wants to do in their lives, and out of that obedience, it brings about this season of stubble. Let me say to you that if you decide to be obedient to what God's calling you to do, and it may very well lead you into a season of stubble, there are going to be people that are going to be looking to see how you respond. There are going to be people that are going to be looking to see what happens in your life. When you go public and say, hey, this is what God's called me to do, this is what I'm going to do in my life, they're going to be watching to see how it turns out. Make sure that when they're watching, in the midst of the season of stubble, they see that your faith is greater than your fear. That you're not anxious about anything. That you're trusting in Him because you felt His heart. And you can't see His hand, but you felt His heart for your life, and so you're doing it. These people are watching and they're waiting, and it says in verse number 20, and the foreman said to them, may the Lord look upon you, Moses and Aaron, and judge you, Moses and Aaron, because you, Moses and Aaron, have made us odious, something hated in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants. And you have put a sword in their hand to kill us. In other words, what you two guys have done is you've made a bad situation worse. I mean, we went from being in captivity and slaves, and sure, we had some oppression, but now we're being beaten. Because now we have a burden placed upon us that we can't meet. Mathematically, we can't do it. We can't get up early enough, and we can't work late enough to meet the quota. And now Pharaoh is not relenting. And the quota has not changed. The demands have not changed. He just thinks we're being lazy. And it's all because of you guys. The blame game. Now you came and you did these wonders before us, and you said that the God of our fathers, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had sent you, and you did these miracles, and we believed you, but now this passage of time has happened, and now things have just gotten worse. And then they say that you have put a sword in their hand to kill us. In other words, if we don't figure out a way to make this situation work, you, by your actions, have put a sword in their hand to kill us. What were you guys thinking? And in the Hebrew foreman's minds, this is the mentality. We can't do this. We can't do this anymore. We can't do this because things have changed so drastically. In February of 2020, God began to open up a door for the Bridge Church of the Carolinas under the leadership of Pastor Buddy Robbins to buy a piece of property in Chesney. It was the old elementary school behind the hot spot where the church is now today. In the process of time of initially looking at the building almost 2 years earlier till this time, the price had gone down dramatically. We entered into an agreement. I was one of the advisors that was working with Pastor Buddy, and we entered into an agreement to borrow $250,000, $250,000 to buy 9 acres of land, the buildings, even though the disarray that they were in. Had no way of knowing that 2 weeks later the world would come to a screeching halt because of the pandemic. Now here, this church, by faith, has signed the paperwork to take out a $250,000 loan, and now there's no gathering. Many of you that were here at Lake Bowen, you know that for 8 weeks we didn't gather together in this place. We filmed services in the social hall. There were times that it would just be me and Tyler for social distancing. And there were times it was just me because Tyler would walk out and I was like, well, I didn't think the sermon was that bad. But I mean, it was one of those things that, we did what we had to do for 8 weeks. And then when it was over, we came back, we did the social distancing. We did 3 services, much like what we're doing now. And we did everything we could to gather together. But that wasn't the case for the Bridge Church of the Carolinas. But here's the amazing thing in the midst of that situation. The people of the Bridge Church of the Carolinas never said, Preacher Buddy, what were you thinking? Preacher Buddy, why did you lead us into this scenario? The people of the Bridge Church of the Carolinas said that we believe this is God's will for our lives. And even though we may be in a season of stubble, we're going to pray for God to show Himself mighty. We're going to pray for God to do that which only He can do. That is not the mindset of the Pharaoh's foremans. These foremans come back and they say, this is all your fault. you two guys have done this. And now you two guys have put a sword in his hand to kill us. Verse 22 and 23, then Moses turned again to the Lord and said, "Oh Lord, why have you brought harm and oppression to this people? Gloom, despair, and agony on me." I mean, that's where Moses is at. Lord, why have you brought this oppression upon your people? Why have you made things harder on them than they already were? Why did you ever send me? I told you I wasn't the man for the job. I told you that you needed to find somebody else, and yet you sent me. I cannot understand your purpose. What are you doing? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has harmed and oppressed the people, and you have done nothing at all to rescue your people. In Moses' mind, God, you said I was going to be the deliverer of the people. But he forgets everything else God had told him. If you were to take your Bible, turn back to Exodus chapter 3, verses 19 and 20, after Moses and God go back and forth about, I want you to do it. I don't know if I'm the man who can do it. Well, I want you, I don't know. You really need to find somebody else. Verses 19 and 20, God actually tells Moses, but I know the heart of Pharaoh. Pharaoh's heart will not be moved unless a mighty hand moves him. And in verse number 20, he says, and so I will move my hand against him. This has not happened up to the story yet. Things have not got hard for Pharaoh yet. The mighty hand of God has not moved against Pharaoh yet. But now as Moses is lamenting before the Lord, what are you thinking? Why are you doing this? What is taking place? It's all setting the stage for God to show himself mighty. Let me say to you that there are some of you, you find yourself in a scenario that you keep asking, why? Why is this happening? Why would God allow this to come my way? Let me say to you that the who or the why is big enough for you to ask him why. Because the who or the why has a plan. Now right now you can't see it. But the Word of God clearly says that the steps of a righteous person are ordered by the Lord, which means that if even your steps lead you into a season of stubble, God's got a plan. The who or the why has a plan. And the who or the why has a purpose. He has a purpose behind what's taking place in your life. He has a purpose, what he's doing. If you remember what he told Moses was going to take place, he says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart so that I might show myself mighty. See, even though we think about this scenario and we think about the who or the why and how his ways are not our ways, we didn't understand in all this that the who or the why is for us. And here's the reality. If God be for us, who can be against us? God is for his people, even though they're in captivity. And even Pharaoh can't be against him because the who or the why is for us and the who or the why is with us. He is with you. He has said, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. Even in your season of stubble where you can't figure out how the ends are going to meet, he's going to meet the ends in the middle. This is where we find Moses at. And let me remind you that the who or the why is big enough for you to ask why. But be careful in the asking of what. Because if the asking of what is, God, what are you thinking? God, what were you imagining? You need to be reminded of Isaiah 55:8. God says through the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 55:8, he says to them, he says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord, or declares the who or the why. Moses looks and he says, you've done nothing at all to rescue your people. And when he says that, he's implying, what are you thinking? What were you imagining was going to happen? And even though he does not articulate it in the text, what Moses is doing is he's making the call for God to show himself mighty. Because Pharaoh has harmed and oppressed this people. So in chapter 6, verse number 1, here's God's response. Then the Lord said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. When you and I were having that conversation on the backside of the desert, and I told you that it would take a mighty hand to move him, my mighty hand's getting ready to move. Now you're going to see what I'm going to do to Pharaoh. For under compulsion, he will not only let them go, but under a compulsion, he will drive them out of this land. The compulsion will not be the will of Pharaoh on his own. The compulsion will not be that Pharaoh will wake up one day and say, you know what, I sure have been awful hard on these Hebrews. I really should just let them go. No, that's not going to be the compulsion. It'll be under compulsion that he will drive them out of this land. Because again, sometimes God has to break a man to make a man. And by the time we get to the end of the 10 plagues, Pharaoh will be broken. And it won't just be, I'm going to let you go tomorrow and then change his mind. It's going to be, I'm going to let you go completely, because he will be completely broken. God will not be stopped by the stiff neck of a king, and God will not be stopped by the stiff neck of one of his children. You don't have to look very far in the Bible to find story after story of those who stiffened their neck and God had to move them with compulsion. You look at Jonah, clear instruction, go to Nineveh, preach. Don't want to go to Nineveh. I'm going to go to Tarshish. I'm going to go get on a boat, and I'm going to go the opposite direction. God says, okay, I'm going to send a storm. And I'm not just going to send a storm, they're going to throw you overboard. And they're not just going to throw you overboard, I'm going to have a great fish to swallow you, and you're going to spend 3 days in the belly of that great fish. And when he spits you out, he's going to spit you out on the shores of Nineveh. And what I'm told you to do now is going to be the same thing I'm going to tell you to do then, but if it's going to take compulsion to make you do it, then I'll use compulsion. You look at Samson. Hand of favors on Samson's life. Spirit comes upon him. He's able to do these incredible strength exhibitions. He's able to get these victories over these mass numbers of Philistines. His pride and arrogance, he reveals to Jezebel exactly where his strength comes from. He winds up losing his strength, winds up losing the favor of God, winds up having his eyes gouged out, winds up becoming a prisoner, winds up ultimately losing his life. Why? Because the Philistines were destroyed at the hands of Samson. God's will was still fulfilled, but it took compulsion before it happened. God's will is going to be fulfilled for the freedom to come to the Hebrew slaves, but it's going to come at the compulsion of God moving in his life. What was Pharaoh's biggest problem? Pharaoh answered 3 questions incorrectly. Who was God? Doesn't matter. Why should I listen to him? I don't have to. What can he do to me? Oh, he's going to find out. In the coming months, he's going to find out. Some of you here today, those are not the 3 most important questions for you. The 3 most important questions for you was, who was Jesus, what did he do, and why does it matter? Preacher Bill talked about last week that there's going to be a time that's going to come that every knee is going to bow, every tongue is going to confess that Christ is Lord. In that moment, they're going to give the answer to those 3 questions. Who was Jesus? He was the sinless Son of God. What did he do? He died on the cross to pay for my sin. Why does it matter? Because there's no other name given through which by man must be saved. And every knee will bow and every tongue will confess under compulsion. The righteous will do it of compulsion, of adoration. The unrighteous will do it under compulsion. They'll have no choice. There's some of you here today as Pastor Christopher and the team comes up. You're here today and you find yourself in a season of stubble. You're not sure why life is going the way it's going. You're not sure why God is doing that which he is doing. But in the midst of that, for some of you, it may be because he's working in your life through compulsion. He's working in your life to get you to the point that you can rightly answer those 3 most important questions you'll ever answer in your life. Because there's truly never been a time that you've done that. Oh, you've come to church. You've celebrated baptisms. You've worked at Vacation Bible School. You've served in the nursery. You've given money. You've done all of these things. But there's never been that time that you came to know Christ. There's never been that time that you entered into a relationship with him. There's some of you, you've answered those 3 questions at a time in your life. You know that you're saved. You know that heaven is your home one day. And yet there's this stirring in your life. There's this compulsion that God is bringing in your life. There's a step of faith that he's compelling you to take. There's an area of service that he's compelling you to step into. There's an act of sacrifice, whatever it may be. In moments like this, though we don't articulate it, what our spirits are yearning to say, God, show yourself mighty. Some of you here today, that begins with a simple step of faith. Of saying, I don't know where the second step is going to take me, but I know who's taking me there. I thought about the scenarios in today's text, and I thought about this old hymn. This is not what we're singing for the invitation, but There's an old hymn that says, softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. See on the portals, he's waiting and watching for you and for me. There are some times in our life that softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. But then there are other times that it's by compulsion that he's calling. Third verse, he says, time is now fleeting. The moments are passing from you and from me. Shadows are gathering, deathbeds are coming for you and for me. My friend, whatever the step of faith may be, let it be under the compulsion of the softly and tenderly, and not under the compulsion of the heavy hand of God.